Hello and welcome to Rising Clyde, the Scottish Climate Justice Show. I'm Ian Bruce in Glasgow, and in this programme we're going to be talking about a circular economy for Scotland. The Scottish Government's Circular Economy Bill is about to be debated in Parliament in Holyrood, and so we want to ask, what is that about, what's it for, and do we really need it? And we're extremely pleased to have with us to talk about that today from Friends of the Earth Scotland, Kim Pratt. She's the Circular Economy Campaigner at Friends of the Earth Scotland, and Franceline Sobierai from ELREC, that's the Edinburgh and Lothians Regional Equality Council, where she works specifically on reuse, recycling, and reducing stuff. So thank you very much to both of you. In a moment, we're very lucky, we're going to be hearing from the Minister, the Scottish Minister for a Circular Economy, Lorna Slater, who I talked to last week. But I'm going to ask you, I'm going to show a little video of a fashion show that happened on the 22nd of February. And I'll ask you to explain to me what that was about and why you think we should have a circular economy bill, what the point of it is. Yeah. So let's just have a look at that fashion show now.
The new top. Go and ask yourself, could it have been swapped? Can we challenge the idea it must be bought? Possessions cannot fill the gap, nor can you pour from an empty cup. Have you ever tried filling yourself up?
So, Kim, you were one of the people involved in organising that. Let's just try and get us all on screen. There we are, yeah. You were one of the people involved in organising that. So just tell us, what was it? What was going on there? What was it about?
That's right. Yeah. Hi, Ian. Yes. So the Circular Economy Showcase was about climate groups and community groups from across Scotland coming together to talk about the way that we use materials and put on this amazing sustainable fashion show outside the Scottish Parliament. So different groups created outfits that represented different parts of the circular economy. So you saw, for example, someone wearing an amazing Medusa headdress made of electrical cables. And that allowed us to talk a little bit about electronic waste and why that's an important part of the circular economy and the way that we use products. And there were other people there who, for example, made, there was someone who made a dress out of synthetic rubber, like inner tubes, which represented the fact that 65% of our clothing is made from plastics now. So this amazing showcase was something that we decided to take to the Scottish Parliament because the Scottish Parliament will shortly be debating whether we need a law on the circular economy and the way that we use materials in Scotland. And together as a group, we were supporting the idea of having a circular economy bill and making that as strong as possible.
That's great. Thanks, Fran. Franceline, just tell us what was your involvement in that fashion show, just very briefly, and what was the point you were hoping to make there?
So good morning, Ian. Good morning to everybody who's watching us. And yeah, I was involved in the inside action and also in the outside action. So we went to the Scottish Parliament to ask MSPs to support the circular economy and ask them to be bold and not only support, but support a strong circular economy. So as Kim mentioned, we were showcasing amazing initiatives working towards the circular economy, but with creativity. So that's, I think, what was a differential. And also the fashion show also highlighted the importance of getting more financial support for reuse and repair projects and businesses in Scotland, because they're playing a very important role, and there are already many initiatives that are working towards the circular economy, but they need more support from the Scottish government. So those are the points that we wanted to make with the fashion show, but also seeking support from our politicians.
Great. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Listen, so before we start digging into the detail of the circular economy bill and how it might work and so forth, let's have a listen to what Lorna Slater told me about this. I asked her, well, why do you want to get this circular economy bill through? What are you aiming for? So let's just have a little listen to what she said.
It's a really good question to ask. What is a circular economy? Indeed, the morning after I was appointed as Scotland's circular economy minister, my dad phoned me up and went, "What on earth is a circular economy?" So a circular economy is one in which we don't waste as much material or energy as we currently do. Everyone will be familiar with products that we buy, we use once, and then we throw away. And that is wasteful not only in terms of the energy and carbon that those products cost, but is wasteful in terms of materials and resources. We know that humans need to live within planetary boundaries. We have to do that. That's a necessity to continue, life on Earth. That's a big part of tackling the climate and nature crises on Earth. To keep planet Earth livable is that we have to live within those planetary boundaries, and that means we cannot use more energy or materials than can be replaced. And our society hasn't been doing that. We have been using and wasting resources elaborately over the last century or so, and we need to change that. And that starts with what we call the hierarchy of use. And that means that in the first place, we want to consume less. So as a society, we don't want to buy things that we don't need. We don't want to a really good example there is packaging. A few months ago, well, probably a couple of years ago now, had to, for example, buy a carbon monoxide monitor. The law changed and I needed to have one for my flat. So I ordered one online, as everybody does, and it came wrapped in plastic, wrapped in cardboard, wrapped in plastic, wrapped in cardboard, wrapped in plastic. I didn't need any of that stuff. All I wanted was the carbon dioxide monitor so that I could comply with the law. So that's a really good example of our society producing goods that nobody wants, that go straight into, in that case, recycling, but they go straight into disuse. So what we need to do is rethink how we make our products, how we eat, how we get around, so that we are not creating this massive amount of both energy waste and product waste. So the first thing we want to do is consume less. Where we must consume, where we have to do things like we all have to wear clothing, we want to wear that clothing for as long as possible, make it out of durable materials. We want to repair it. And that goes for everything in our society. We want to use things, make quality things and use them for longer, pass them on to people when we're done with them, maybe to future generations, pass them on to our kids. And I think that some of these things are really interesting to discuss because I think they're about quality of life. When we talk about single-use goods, for example, single-use plastics, everyone can remember the experience of eating food with a plastic fork. It's actually really unpleasant. It's not nice. No one ever says, "Oh, the best meal of my life was with a plastic fork." So some of this moving to better quality materials that last longer is not only about what we're doing for the planet and reducing waste, but about improving our quality of life as well. Continuing to move down that waste hierarchy is into the repair space and reuse, when you take things apart and reuse the materials that are in them. And then there's the sort of recycling angle where it is going to waste, but we're going to extract what we can from it. And very finally, at the bottom of that pyramid would be putting things into landfill and incineration. So moving to a circular economy is all about making sure that energy isn't wasted and those materials get back and reused. So that was a very long explanation, Ian, but I appreciate it.
No, that's fine. But My understanding is that all the parties in Holyrood are basically, or in principle, in favour of a circular economy. So does that mean this bill is just going to sail through, or are there significant differences on exactly what that means and how it should be done?
There are indeed, and the circular economy bill is one piece of a larger, even global piece of work. Within Scotland, we already have significant powers to put in place legislation around goods. For example, the proposed ban on disposable vapes. We don't need new legislation for that. We already have the powers to do that. So we already have significant powers, and it's about how effectively we use them and how we use them going forward. The circular economy bill gives us additional powers, but of course we are limited in Scotland as a devolved nation that we don't have all the powers. So the circular economy bill is one piece of that puzzle, taking more powers than what we have, but obviously limited by devolution. So there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen here. We need to use the powers we have more effectively. We need to work with the UK government and other governments around the world to implement those policies which are not devolved to us. And then we need to take the powers in this bill to take us as a country that next step forward.
But is that significantly different from what the other parties want?
So the details in the bill there's sort of 11 or 12 different sections of the bill, and some of them are quite technical. They're increasing fines for certain types of littering, that kind of thing. The main kind of focus of the bill, which I think is going to drive the change, is around taking the powers to set targets for ourselves as a nation, around setting targets for our local authorities and working with the local authorities to bring in that a more standardized system of recycling. So I guess where there's particular conflicts or particular changes that maybe opposition parties would like to see is some people would like us to go a bit further in some areas, and some people are worried about, say, the impact on business. One of the proposals in the bill is to ban the disposal of unused goods. So in France, they have a law that bans the disposal of things like cosmetics, textiles. So if you're a company that manufactures, let's say, textiles, clothing, but you don't sell, there's a certain product line that just doesn't sell very well. If this legislation was brought forward, you would be banned from sending that to landfill. You would have to put that back into use, make sure it got reused, or at the very least recycled rather than putting it to landfill. So those kind of provisions, while they're very ambitious and we think they will make a big change, you can imagine that some opposition parties are concerned of the impact that might have on businesses, for example.
Sure. I mean, we saw something similar with the bottle deposit scheme, I think, didn't we? But yes. Talking of targets, though, I mean, a lot of environmental campaigners, and I think the Parliamentary Commission that's just published its report is proposing consumption targets, as a way of actually reducing consumption over the long term and making that a sort of stronger contribution to tackling climate change. So far, the Scottish Government, I believe, has not supported that. So how are you going to respond to that?
So there's two pieces to that. One is that the bill itself gives us the powers to take targets. Gives us the powers to set targets. And absolutely, I'm happy to consider looking at consumption targets. In fact, I think that needs to be the case, that there are some measure of consumption targets in there. The bill itself is very clear that the consumption of materials is, reduction in consumption of materials is the whole point of the bill. So that is the case. I think that the difference is sort of a technicality about when those targets are developed and what kind of legislation they end up in. So at this point, we will take the powers to take the targets, and then we will develop what those targets are, but absolutely happy to consider, well, in fact, we need to have some sort of consumption targets in there. But
isn't there a sort of bigger strategic issue here, which is maybe a difficult one, I imagine, for you to argue? As you know better than I, there's a huge debate in the environmental movement about the whole issue of globally reducing consumption, degrowth, or however you want to put it, which is not an easy sell at the moment in Scotland or anywhere else. Is that something that, do you think that we need to move in that direction, even if it's not possible perhaps to go very far in that direction at the moment?
So as I'm speaking today as a Scottish Government Minister, I will give you the Scottish Government line. If we were speaking in a party space or you were speaking to my Green Party colleagues, you might get a slightly different answer. So in terms of the Scottish Government space, we are looking at that sustainable development and moving to the circular economy. And I think there's an important piece to look at around, I alluded to it earlier, about how the circular economy actually creates business opportunities and jobs, because there absolutely is not a case that it is one or the other. There are many sectors as we go forward towards net zero, towards a lower carbon economy that need to grow, and the businesses in the circular economy space are absolutely some of those. There's actually huge opportunities here. Things like the collecting and reuse and recycling of textiles is a big opportunity space. As we move to standardizing collections by local authorities of various materials, what we do is create larger quantities of good quality recyclate. All that's valuable. I mean, everyone can imagine that a ton of old steel is valuable because it's recyclable, but a ton of used plastic is also really, really valuable if it's clean and well sorted. So by producing these sort of large quantities of material, we can then attract investment into Scotland because people will come to process that material and help us, move it turn it into new goods, and all of that creates jobs, business opportunities, and is just significant for Scottish economy. So I'm really excited actually about how moving to net zero and the circular economy can benefit Scotland.
One last question, Lorna. I mean, let's assume that it does go through Holyrood. I mean, though I think we probably can assume that. What happens then? What will happen in Westminster?
So this is a Scottish government bill. It will be, I hope that it will be passed by the Scottish Parliament. This is what we call a framework bill. So it's largely giving us the powers to take other actions forward. With this bill, we have said that, for example, one of the provisions in this bill is to take the power to charge for single-use items. And we've said that the first thing we want to do with that power is put in place a charge for single-use coffee cups. So that will be what will happen next on that provision. And the same with the other provisions. For example, one of the provisions in the bill is to get some businesses, in this case, food sector businesses, to report on their waste and surplus food. So the bill gives us the powers to ask the sector to do that, and the next thing that will happen after the bill is we will take that forward and work with the food sector to put in place these reporting duties.
Maybe I could ask you first, both of you, just have sort of an initial reaction. What particularly jumped out at you, Kim, from that, from what the minister was saying there?
So there were a couple of things there, I think. Firstly, I think it's important to say that the minister clearly has an excellent understanding of why we need to change the way that we use materials. She was recognizing that a circular economy is about tackling the climate crisis and the nature crisis, that the most important thing that we need to do is consume less. And I think she was also speaking towards having higher quality products and recognizing that it's not just one thing that needs to change, it is all the products, it's a whole system that we need to change. So she was recognizing so much of why we need a circular economy, and that's brilliant, but it makes it almost more disappointing then than that her ambition for the circular economy bill seems to be so out of line with that and so muted. So she was talking.
Sorry, let me just jump in and Kim, let me just jump in and ask you to clarify that a bit. What exactly is out of line with what, do you think? So her understanding of why we need a circular economy, because it's so important, it's a vital part of meeting our climate change goals. That is out of line with the circular economy bill that she has proposed, which doesn't go nearly far enough to do that. It's not nearly as ambitious as, say, our Climate Change Act. So, for example, the targets that she was talking about in our Climate Change Act, those are written into the primary legislation
of the bill. They are mandatory targets. They are linked to a strategy. Whereas in the circular economy bill, she talked about having targets that reduce consumption. And that's the first time that I've ever heard her say that we need targets to reduce consumption. That's brilliant. But the way it's set out in the circular economy bill, they are optional targets that would be written into secondary legislation, which is much weaker. So the circular economy, if that is a vital part of meeting the climate change, our climate change goals, then the legislation must also reflect that as well. And at the moment, it's far too weak. So it's great that the minister recognises the importance of the circular economy, but then it's disappointing that the circular economy bill doesn't reflect that.
I want to come back to some of those points in a moment, Kim, but Franceline, what did you take away from that interview, especially in terms of the work you do with communities?
Mm-hmm. So, well, firstly, I feel very happy to see that the circular economy bill is being proposed in Scotland, because I think it's a very step forward towards tackling the climate emergency. I did like that she acknowledged, the targets as a nation and also the provisions so business won't be able to send waste to landfill. I think that's very important. However, I didn't see her mentioning just transition and how will the bill create a framework for jobs creations and to address climate injustice. So, for example, when we are talking about the implementation of the bill, so how will this information be passed across, different communities and ethnic minorities communities specifically, because that's a very economic opportunity to help them to get employment. And I haven't seen that addressed, in her speech at all.
Can I just jump in there, because that sounds very interesting. I'd like you to elaborate a bit more, Franceline. I mean, in what sense can a circular economy, a bill, or the practice of a circular economy, address those issues that you're talking about, the kind of unemployment issues that particularly, say, migrant communities might face?
Right. So for that, I bring a research from IPCC. So this research shows that by 2050, there will be more than 200 million climate migrants around the world. And that's not to mention conflict displacement. So the circular economy is an economic opportunity to support these individuals to secure financial stability when they come to Scotland, because, more refugees will come to Scotland at some point, right? So I believe that a strong circular economy needs to take climate justice into account. So, for example, there's the energy skills passport for the energy transition. So I believe that something like a circular economy skills passport could be introduced, aiming at upskilling people.
I'm not sure everybody knows what a skills passport is, Franceline. So could you just spell that out for us?
Yeah, so basically the energy skills passport is just a way of upskilling people who are working now in the oil industry and need to transition to working with renewables. So, I believe that something similar to that could help with the circular economy bill. So creating like a skills passport, but aiming at upskilling people to work in the reuse and repair sector. But then what needs to be considered is language and accessibility to make sure that people from all backgrounds are included in the process.
That sounds very interesting. I think you've done some work on, all right, but let's put it this way. Do you have some concrete stories or examples you could give us to illustrate this a bit more about how beginning to work with reuse and recycling and reduction is actually having an impact on vulnerable communities?
Definitely. So, for example, at ILREC, we have the sewing club. So the sewing club is an amazing example. So it's we help people, we teach people how to repair clothes, and also we have people from all backgrounds, you can imagine, and a lot of people from the global south, from conflicts areas of the world, and they come to the sewing club every Monday, and they're learning, techniques of sewing. They are working on new projects. So, for example, they are reusing old fabrics, so like curtains and this kind of things, and or donated fabrics from different organizations, and they're creating new items out of it. So we have some successful stories of people that came along, learned how to sew, and then they became professional tailors, and now they are providing these services to their communities and like community members. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And if we are talking about having products that will last longer, that also entails having more reuse businesses, reuse opportunities, but people need to be prepared. So that means that they need to be upskilled.
Let me pick up with you, Kim, a moment on this sort of idea of how a circular economy can combine with a just transition. Because obviously, Friends of the Earth, I know there's a lot of work on just transition, understandably mainly focused on transitioning away from fossil fuels towards renewable energies. But where and how would a circular economy fit into that? And what would need to be in a circular economy legislation in order to make that happen?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So as the Minister said, a circular economy creates a huge opportunity for jobs. But whenever we're talking about creating jobs, we have to think about how we do that in a just way. So making sure that there is security there for people who are maybe involved in a linear type job at the moment, where so for example, a bin lorry driver or someone who works for a big retailer, their jobs will have to change in a circular economy. So how do the government support people to transition to more circular, more sustainable, greener jobs in a way that creates security for them and their family and supports them to develop the skills that are needed? So there's a few statistics around this as well. So for example, if you have 10,000 tons of waste, one group called London, who focus on creating a circular economy in London, have estimated that you could deal with that waste by creating one job for an incinerator job, and it would just take one person to manage 10,000 tons of waste. Or you could create 386 circular economy jobs where people are taking those materials and reusing what can be reused, and then where they can't be reused, finding ways to recycle them. So it creates a lot more economic activity, but you also have to make sure that you're supporting people in that process of creating those jobs. It takes a lot more skill to repair a laptop than it does just to incinerate it. So it's about connecting the skills that we need and the supporting people to do that. It's not just about the number of jobs that we can create in Scotland. It's making sure that it works for people too.
And what about the legislation? Is that something that needs to be in legislation, or is it? I mean, and is it? To what extent is it in the bill at the moment?
Yeah, so I think what's important about the legislation is that it creates the framework that we need to create to develop a circular economy, and that means if a just transition isn't in the framework from the start, then it makes it much harder to embed it in the process as we develop a circular economy. So the most important thing for just transition in a circular economy is making sure that those words, just transition, are included in the circular economy bill as they are in the Climate Change Act. And at the moment, the circular economy bill doesn't mention a just transition. So we would like to see just transition and resource justice as well, which is about making the supply chains that supply materials and products to Scotland are fairer as well. We would like to see both those things included in the circular economy bill.
Franceline, when you do this kind of work with communities, do you run up against a lot of resistance? I mean, people, say, well, I don't want to have to read, it's hard, it takes longer to sort of recycle things, or you know, it's easier just to kind of pick it up and throw it away or whatever, you know. Is there, you know, is there real resistance there? And I suppose that what I'm even more interested in you trying to explain to me, I mean, how do you come, if there is some resistance, how do you deal with that in a democratic way? Because if you're talking about reuse and recycling being actually an instrument for boosting and deepening, you know, community involvement and community democracy and so forth, how do you square that, you know, with the sort of resistance that I think a lot of people instinctively feel sometimes, you know?
Mm-hmm. So I think the key here is education. And that's why it's really important that the Scottish government invest more in environmental related projects. So in the communities Reduce, Reuse and Recycle, we work with different communities. So the Polish community, South Asian and Chinese communities. So what we see is that there's the cultural barrier. So for example, we see that the Chinese community, they believe that reusing things brings bad luck. So how can you address that? Basically through conversations, through education, and that's what we work with. So we have different workshops on upcycling while, you know, they're coming to the workshop, they're socializing. So that's also a way of tackling isolation. So there is the well-being element there, which is really important. Sorry, and also we have different communities that have this, you know, beliefs that that waste is bad, or like reusing things is bad. So I think it's about bringing opportunities for them to see that's actually good. So another example of that is the swap shop events that we host with Granton Goes Greener and also Networking Key Services. So we get donations from community members, and then we just display that in a big venue, and we make everything for free. So that's entirely free for everybody. So we have so many like families, you know, I think minorities, families, asylum seekers, refugees coming along and bringing and just taking like bags, luggages full of clothes, kitchen utensils, baby clothes, toys, and everything like you can imagine. So they are coming and they are seeing that there's good quality things that can be just reused, repurposed. And then that's how you actually change the mindset, you know, by chatting and showing that things can be done differently.
So that's also something that needs, you know, the provision for that kind of education and, you know, like is something that also needs to be in legislation or not?
I suppose it is. It needs to have a provision for ensuring that, you know, education will be taken into account. So as I said, I think supporting, you know, community projects is really like key in this situation, because there are amazing initiatives in Edinburgh that are already working towards the circular economy. Also, for example, there is the Edinburgh Tool Library that you pay a membership and then you have access to tools, and it's just a very like symbolic amount. And they also have workshops, so that's another example of really accessible things, and also projects that are boosting, you know, the community aspect and also mental health aspect, mental health of people. And the bill should have a provision of, you know, investment for this kind of projects.
Okay, thank you very much. Kim, I mean, we only have a few minutes left, but what else do you feel is lacking, either absent or not sufficiently robust in the current bill? And what do you want to happen next, basically?
So what we would like to see for the circular economy bill is the same type of legal framework that we have for the Climate Change Act in Scotland. So that means strong targets that are science-based, and for the circular economy, that would be aiming to get to sustainable levels of material use by 2045, in line with climate change targets. So in carbon terms, that is net zero by 2045 for our carbon footprint. And in material terms, that's everybody living on less than 8 tons of materials per person per year. At the moment, we're 19 tonnes of materials per year, just for context. So strong targets linked to a strategy that tells us how sector by sector we are going to meet those targets, an independent body to monitor progress, and better reporting in general, and then just transition and resource justice embedded into the bill. We would like to see all those things together in the circular economy bill. Some things are there, partly there. There are gaps in a lot of it, though. So we do support the bill, but it needs to be much stronger than it is at the moment.
Just one final issue, because I think you've mentioned this not today, but on other occasions, is this issue of including products that aren't produced in Scotland, imports basically. Just explain to us what that's about.
Yes, so our climate change targets are maybe a good place to start, because we already have these climate change targets that aim to reduce our climate emissions within Scotland. But actually, if you look at our wider carbon footprint, which relates to everything that we consume, 58% of our carbon emissions actually come from imports. So they aren't included in our existing climate targets. And so circular economy targets that covered our whole carbon footprint would correct that and make sure that we weren't offshoring our emissions instead of reducing them. So it would make our climate efforts much more effective within Scotland. So it's a vital part of reducing global carbon emissions, and Scotland must take responsibility for the materials we're demanding, even if those are coming from overseas. Brilliant.
I mean, it would be lovely to keep on talking about this, but I think that's quite a clear message to end on, and it kind of links up to the work you're doing, Franceline, with migrant communities and so on and so forth, I think. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure there'll be lots more to talk about the circular economy bill, as it goes forward, and we'll see whether it's strengthened or not. But that's all we have time for the moment. Thank you very much to Franceline Sobierai from LREC and to Kim Pratt from Friends of the Earth Scotland. Until next time, this is all from Rising Clyde. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.